In the middle of the night on Friday, well, I guess technically it was Saturday by then, I was awakened from a sound sleep by a telephone call. And I looked at the screen of my phone and I could see that it was Trinity Church calling, which told me that our fancy phone system that permits a person prompted by the telephone greeting to press 4 in case of a pastoral emergency requiring the immediate attention of a priest, had forwarded this call to me. So I answered, and a male voice on the other end said to me, "Is this the pastor?" Which was how I knew immediately that it was none of you. And I said, "Yeah, this is he." He said, "Well, this is an emergency. I really need your help." And I said, "Is anybody dying?" And the answer to that question was no. So, after a brief conversation, for my own sake and for the sake of my wife, I tried to make it as brief as possible. I made it clear that I would be in my office on Monday and an appointment could be made. But it's always a challenge when faced with real human need, because clearly for this caller, it was an emergency of some kind, even though not one that I recognized as such in the moment. It's always hard to put oneself in the position of deciding, is this important enough for me to bother with? And as a representative of the church, of the gospel, could even say of Jesus, I carry that a sense of particular responsibility around making those decisions. It's not an easy choice I have to make, even at 1:30 in the morning, when someone has done what I consider to be something inappropriate. But I took some comfort, actually, from the gospel lesson for today, which, of course, I've been thinking about this week. Remembering that when Jesus arrives back in Galilee after his voyage across to the other side, he is met there by the same great crowd of people that he had left behind. A crowd so great that he had to get out in a boat just off the shore of the lake to teach, because they kept, kind of crushing in on him. Well, he didn't set about to heal every one of those people. There's 2 people in this story today who receive healing from Jesus. Out of that great crowd that is desperate for his help, that is pressing in on him, this great mass of human need that travels with him wherever he goes. There are only 2 in today's gospel lesson whom he actually heals. And it's not clear exactly what the criteria are by which they are favored, except that in the telling of the story of their healing, our faith is encouraged, is sustained, is awakened. Maybe that's how Jesus set about his works of healing, knowing that he couldn't heal everyone. He couldn't set the world right all by himself. Even if he had stayed up 24 hours a day and just never stopped, the need would exceed his capacity to respond. Anyway, there is this man, a man named Jairus, the leader of the synagogue there, a man so socially prominent that he even has a name, which is unusual among the people who appear in the healing stories in the Gospels. And he comes and he falls down at Jesus' feet in a posture that in other contexts would have connoted worship. And he pleads with Jesus repeatedly, "Can you come? Can you come to the bedside of my little girl? She is at death's door." And so Jesus goes with him. And we hear by the end of the story how ignoring those who have come and met them on the way and said, she's already dead. Don't humiliate yourself any further by having the teacher come when there's no need after all. But Jesus says to Jairus, "Do not be afraid, only believe." He goes to the house where there are people weeping and wailing and ululating in a mass public display of grief. And one does wonder how grief-stricken they really are, or whether they're just, kind of going through the motions as is appropriate when the daughter of one of the leaders in the community has died. Because when Jesus shows up and says, "She's not dead, she's only sleeping," their weeping and wailing immediately turns to laughter, ridicule, and disbelief. Jesus goes in with Peter and James and John and Jairus and the girl's mother, and they go to the place where the little girl is, and Jesus takes her by the hand and says, "Talitha kum." And the Greek New Testament quotes the Aramaic at that point, the common familiar language that Jesus would have spoke in private. And so this very public encounter with this public figure in this scene of public mourning and grief is turned into a very tender and intimate, private moment. Jesus takes the little girl by the hand and says, "Little girl, get up." And she stands and begins to walk about. And that's when the gospel writer tells us that she's 12 years old, which is how many years that other woman in the story has been suffering from hemorrhages that will not dry up. A little girl on the threshold of womanhood, and the other woman whose womanhood has been a curse for her. Not because the regular monthly bleeding that is common to women is a curse, but because this bleeding doesn't stop. For 12 years, this woman has been bleeding. And nothing that that she has done has been able to cure it. She's sought out the help of many physicians, the gospel says, and has suffered at their hands. You can only imagine what kinds of crude treatments were provided by those physicians to try to cure her ailment. And by the way, this ailment would have rendered her ritually impure, unable to participate fully in the religious life of Israel, barred from entering the precincts of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. A woman who is religiously alienated by God, from God, by the purity codes of her culture. A woman whose touch is enough to communicate that impurity to other people. Yet it is she who thinks to herself, if I can but touch the garment of Jesus, I will be healed. And so she does. And what is communicated in that touch is not ritual impurity, but the healing power of God. As she feels in her body the source of her bleeding drying up, so Jesus feels in his body the Holy Spirit's power going forth from him into her, without him even willing it so. There in the midst of all that crowd of needy people, somehow her faith, her willingness to transgress by reaching out and touching the person of Jesus, is what has opened a channel for the person of God to come through him into her and to heal her. How do we know what is a real emergency? How do we know what, out of all the vast sea of need that surrounds us, we are responsible for addressing? How do we know what we can do with the limited resources that we have to heal a world so stricken with suffering, injustice, and violence, and pain? I wish I could tell you. I wish I could tell you. But there's something in this story today, these two stories, embedded one within the other. Something that tells us about the power of faith. Faith that sometimes shows up in the intercession of those who act on our behalf. Those who go through the proper channels to request assistance. But that also comes to those who approach us in faith in a way that is transgressive, that pushes on the boundaries, that maybe violates the social norms, and yet awakens a channel for God to act. In either what case, it is faith. The faith of Jairus, the faith of the woman with the hemorrhage. Of course, above all, the faith of Jesus. The faith in God's power to touch us, to speak to us, bring us new life, to restore us to health, to communion, to belonging. In all of our acts of generosity, our acts of kindness, charity, helping, can they be addressed to that faith? Faith that it is God who acts, it is God who heals, it is God who gives life. We are simply those who are in the right place, the right time, or maybe the wrong place, the wrong time.